Chapter 16 Go Out Swinging. Consciousness swam back to Ryan in slivers. Gasping for breath, a grab of blinding pain, and the serene blackness consumed him again. A sharp kick in the ribs, ringing in his ears, and then nothingness. A blinding light that seemed to burn his brain. Pins and needles traversing his limbs, and this time, finally, he was able to grasp at reality for more than a few seconds. His ears were still ringing, but it was more muted now, as though it was coming from inside his skull. He squinted through his long blonde lashes to dull the too bright fluorescent light that seemed to fill every corner of the room. As far as he could see, he was alone, on his side on the cold concrete floor, his knees pulled up to his chest in a kind of fetal position. His arms were unresponsive as he tried to move, uncomfortably pinned behind his back. His legs weren't doing much better, seizing with cramps as he tried to extend them. As his eyes gradually adjusted, he craned his neck to look over his shoulder and felt a sting like a paper cut at his throat and a warm trickle of blood run down the side of his neck. The brand radiated pain like it was still burning his flesh. He saw his hands were tied behind him with the same smooth nylon rope from before. It was now blood-stained, and his hands were a pale purplish color from lack of blood flow. He gently tried to curl his fingers, and his right hand felt like it was on fire as he attempted to reposition them to regain feeling. There was a large patch of blood on the floor where his head had been, that probably accounted for the ceaseless ringing in his head. His mouth was dry, and as he tried to lick his lips, he noticed the caked blood there, too. A sudden inhalation of cold air caused him to cough, and he became aware of all of the pains in his chest from broken ribs, bruises from beatings, and the cuts inflicted on his body. He glanced down, and he was greeted with hues of red and brown and green and purple. Wonderful. His eyelids started to droop closed again, when suddenly the door creaked open and two men walked in. Shadles and Zutora. Ryan closed his eyes and lay absolutely still, listening to their movements as they shuffled things around the room. It was now abundantly clear that Zutora was actually the one in charge of all this. Ryan was slowly starting to put the pieces together. Less than an hour earlier, he thought he was a dead man, waiting for Shadles to slit his throat. Zutora was the one who cut the feed and jumped in to stop it. Shadles had not been happy. Ryan remembered the weight of the other man on his chest, hands covering his mouth and nose before he'd lost consciousness. He'd been burnt. But Zutora hadn't allowed Shadles to finish the job, so they clearly still needed him alive. As bait, as a publicity stunt. "Reckon he's awake?" a voice cut through the ringing in his head. "Oh, he's awake. Vagabond, will you be staying with us long this time?" Shadles mocked. Ryan opened his eyes, already dark with preempted defiance. He could see the camera equipment was still set up and had been moved, but didn't appear to be on, this time just a camera and a directional mic trained on him. Looked like the setup team weren't coming back. Probably preparing for an attempted ambush in case the crew came for him. "That depends. What's the room service like?" he croaked out with a smirk through the grogginess. Shadles laughed. "See? He's fine," he insisted in response to some previous conversation. "We'll get a good show out of him yet." "Well, fuck. Just so you know, the AH crew aren't coming. You might as well just get it over with," Ryan said flatly, a little surprised with how honest his voice sounded. "Aw, but that'd ruin all the fun," Shadles tutted. I'd hate to miss that." Zutora had dragged over a plain wooden chair and roll of duct tape. Ryan could guess what came next. He was lifted up painfully by his arms. Shadles and Zutora dragged him to his knees, and they manhandled him to sit on the chair, forcing his arms over the high back and securing his ankles to the chair legs with the duct tape. He felt open and exposed, wounds stinging, branded letters still burning into the back of his neck. They turned the chair to face the camera setup. "So, is this the part where it's meant to get fun?" Sarcasm was his safety net. Zutora ignored him. "Get the stuff. I'll set up the stream." Shadles briefly left the room. Meanwhile, Zutora hooked up a laptop to the camera and presumably started another live stream or recording. Shadles returned with a 5-gallon jerry can. Ryan immediately found himself sniffing the air to determine the contents. It smelled faintly of diesel, but more like it might just be residue. It didn't have the sharp, sweet scent it would have if it had been full. When Ryan eyed the small towel Shadles was carrying, he knew it contained water. It must have shown on his face, because Shadles' eyes brightened at the sight. "Don't worry, it's only water," Shadles assured him sardonically. "Yep, that's, Ryan stuttered. "You and I might have different definitions of the word fun." The blinking red light had flickered on the camera. "You know, I disagree. I think you'd find this very fun. It's funny how you change your tune when you're the one getting fucked over." Ryan paused, looking exaggeratedly pensive. "All right, I guess I gotta give you that one." Shadle shrugged and grinned, turning back to the camera. "Where are we at with the stream?" "Ready to go when you are," Zutora muttered, looking up from the screen. "Just don't dick around too much this time, capiche?" Shadles rolled his eyes but nodded. Zutora shrugged and tapped at a few keys. "Do we think that's something he's capable of?" Ryan asked condescendingly. He was past the point of caring if he was recognized. He figured he'd already blown it when he tried to warn the crew about the impending trap. Shadles took him by surprise this time. No introductions, no long-winded monologue. He simply hooked a foot around one of the front legs of the chair and kicked it out. The chair and Ryan toppled backwards. Ryan tucked his chin to his chest as he fell, but the back of his head still hit the solid concrete ground with a crack that felt like it split his skull and made his vision blur. His arms were still pinned behind him, but luckily the curve of the back of the chair prevented them from being crushed under his own weight. Small victories. Shadles threw the damp towel unceremoniously over his face, and seconds later the cold splash of water came flooding in. There was some small relief as the icy cold water trickled around to reach the back of his neck and soothe his still burning skin. He held his breath at first, but it wasn't long before his lungs felt like they were on fire. As soon as he tried to suck in air, the water felt like it flooded his airways. He knew it wasn't as bad as his body was telling him, but there was no override switch for the feeling of being drowned, even for the vagabond. He involuntarily thrashed his head, trying to dislodge the towel, or get away from the water, and just as he thought he was going to succeed, the towel was pulled away and he was allowed to cough and gasp for breath, spluttering and dry-retching. When he'd finally regained control of his breathing, Ryan found Shadles staring down at him with a bemused smile. "See something you like?" Ryan coughed out, maintaining his shield of sass as long as possible, but he could feel it starting to wear thin. He simply cocked his head to the side. "Maybe. Let's see." He pressed the towel to Ryan's face, Ryan instinctively trying to pull away. He rucked wipely at his face. His face paint. Shit. Luckily, it was stubborn, and the black around his eyes was mostly waterproof, just smudging under the effort, but Shadles managed to remove most of it from the rest of Ryan's face. His bruises and scars would be on show. Maybe if he was lucky, his face was messed up enough for him to be unrecognizable. "Check it out." Shadles motioned for Zutora to get a better angle. "The vagabond is just a man. Got kind of a pretty boy face under all that paint." "Well, not so much anymore." Zutora laughed obnoxiously, and Ryan wished he could just disappear into the floor, but he was careful not to show it. He kept his expression a mask of detached amusement, as though he was in on some joke they were not privy to. Shadles picked up the jerry can and sloshed the contents around inside. "Don't worry, still have plenty to go." He tossed the cloth back over Ryan's face, and the waterboarding continued. By the time Shadles had run out of water, Ryan was physically and mentally exhausted. The thought had even crossed his mind to actively try to drown himself, but his body would simply not allow him to do it. He now understood why it was such an effective torture method. His lungs and sinuses burned, and his throat was raw from coughing and later vomiting the water he thought he'd swallowed or inhaled during the short breaks Shadles had afforded him. Now that the can was empty, he lay acquiescent on the ground, breathing in short, raspy breaths, the water dripping off his face, making swirly gray patterns from his residual face paint, and mixing in the long strands of his sandy hair before leisurely making its way down the drain nearby. Twice now. This is twice you've let him get the better of you. The blood was starting to pool in his head from the position he'd been in. His vision was swimming. Shadles pulled the chair back upright, and Ryan slumped forward as far as his arms would allow him, his head dropping to his chest and his wet hair falling around his face, looking even longer than usual. He was shaking involuntarily. The skin at the back of his neck felt like it was blistering. It wasn't worth fighting it. The crew wasn't going to walk into a trap, and he was due to be publicly executed soon enough anyway. Quitter. Don't let them break you. At least go out swinging. He painfully swallowed the lump in his throat and allowed himself to shake, timing his laugh to match his shudders as best he could. Jesus, this again? Shadles shook his head. Your crew was right about you. You are crazy. Totally fucked in the head, vagabond. You don't get it, do you? You get nothing from this. All this will get you is a painful death at the hands of the fake AH crew. They may not be coming for me now, but they will catch up with you. Ryan growled menacingly. The only consolation you get is that without me around, you probably won't suffer quite as long. Shadle's expression darkened, the anger in him almost visibly building up. You're a smug prick, aren't you? So I've been told. Ryan beamed back, gathering strength from the rise he'd gotten from him. The quick backhand slap to the face that followed didn't affect his smirk at all, nor did the right hook that connected with his cheekbone and made his head ring. Shadles shook it off, and Ryan laughed again. This time, it came out smooth as velvet. It was unmistakably the maniacal laugh of the vagabond. Again, it sent chills down Shadle's spine. Even Zutora felt uncomfortable. How long? Shadles practically barked at Zutora. Zutora stared him down, shaking his head. Not yet. He was stern. Fuck. Shadles snatched the roll of duct tape. Help me with this, then. I'm sick of listening to him. Shadles and Zutora managed to wrestle Ryan into a headlock, and Shadles wrapped the duct tape over his mouth and around his head a couple of times to be sure. Once he was satisfied Ryan couldn't open his fucking mouth, he pinched his nostrils closed to remind him of who ran the show. He waited until Ryan started to struggle, but kept his grip firm. Shadles kept his voice low as he whispered in Ryan's ear, I will break you. I can end you at any time. Remember that. Ryan stopped struggling and stared him straight in the eye. It took all his willpower as his lungs burned and his brain screamed for air. If he could have smirked, he would have. The look in his eyes said it for him. Oh, we both know that's not true. Shadles got the message. He didn't let go. Ryan struggled again, involuntarily more violently, but despite his heart pounding, his efforts grew weaker as the world became fuzzy. Shadles released him with a subtle kick from Zutora, but he was clearly frustrated. Ryan sucked in lungfuls of fresh air through his nose, and the world solidified again. Ryan knew he was getting to him. Shadles might be able to physically hurt him, but every time he saw that anger flash across his face, Ryan's determination intensified. Shadles tried to sound dangerous, but Ryan could hear a trace of whiny irritation coming through in his voice. Fuck it. Let's just start now. I'll go slow. I won't kill him straight away. Zutora had moved back to the computer and quickly typed something before slapping the laptop closed. You're making us look like incompetent fools. Shadles huffed. He's making us look like fools. I'm just trying to keep them on their toes. Yeah, we'll take a break. Go cool off, for fuck's sake. Stop letting him get to you. Zutora was fuming, but kept himself comparatively well in control. I said we'd start back in a half hour. Gives us time to get prepared. Shadles paced a little and groaned in frustration. Fine. He spat the word. Good. Go check on the others. Make sure they're armed and ready should the fakes try anything. And get a patrol out on the perimeter. Have them check in at regular intervals. We're getting close to crunch time. If they're gonna show, it'll be soon. Shadles nodded, turning back to Ryan just before he left the room, venom in his voice. If they show. 30 minutes was enough time for Ryan to lose what felt like all his body heat. The water had saturated his hair and had been constantly dripping down his face and body, and the drafty concrete room seemed to suck all the warmth from his bones. The only consolation was that the pain in the brain had started to subside, if only superficially. By the time Zutora had finished preparing the equipment for the stream, Ryan was shivering. Shadles returned. He looked as though he'd calmed somewhat, but Ryan could tell there was a madness bubbling beneath the surface. He was just barely restraining himself. This was clearly personal for him. Shadles wanted to make him suffer. Ryan refused to acknowledge the fear that was creeping in, threatening to unravel him at the seams. Don't give up. Not yet. You still got a couple of assholes to prove wrong. Shadles leaned in close to Zutora and lowered his voice. Ryan couldn't make out what he'd said, but he did catch what looked like the word perimeter on his lips, and Zutora looked concerned, but Shadles waved him off. Let's just get on with it. Hey, don't forget the bigger picture, Zutora reminded him forcefully. Yeah, just let me know when you're ready. Shadles had a revolver that Ryan hadn't seen earlier and was emptying the rounds from the chamber onto the table. He pocketed a single round. Zutora gave him the nod, typing something as he did so. I'm here to end you, vagabond, Shadles began, remaining out of view behind the camera. This is for the crimes you've committed with the fake AH crew, for everyone you've fucked over. This is the beginning of their end. This is the beginning of our rise. We're taking this city back. He sauntered over to Ryan, found the edge of the tape gagging him, and unraveled it, pulling strands of Ryan's hair with it as he ripped it off. This time, I want to hear you suffer. Ryan glowered. Bad news then, sunshine. I'm not giving you shit. We'll see. Shadles made a show of picking up a round from the table and loading it for the camera, then spinning the chamber. I want to play a game. Ryan did his best to control his shivering and rolled his eyes. Yeah, all right, Jigsaw. Shadles continued unfazed. I think you're familiar with this one, vagabond. It's Russian roulette, with a twist. He pressed the barrel against Ryan's right kneecap and pulled the trigger. Ryan's eyes went wide, but he relaxed as soon as he heard the click of an empty chamber. I suppose I should explain, for those playing along at home. That smug fucking smile was back now that he was in charge and in front of the camera. 1 round in the chamber, a 1 in 6 chance of getting shot, with the odds improving with each turn. With only 1 player, though, that isn't much fun. Ryan laughed sarcastically. You don't say. So we're gonna mix things up a bit. He hovered the barrel of the gun over different areas of Ryan's body. His thigh, stomach, heart, shoulder. Every time he hesitated, Ryan flinched slightly, evaluating his chances of survival. Not there, not there, not there. That's survivable. 1 in 5 now. He pressed the barrel to Ryan's head, right between the eyes. Any last words? If he was entirely honest with himself, he was almost relieved. The idea that he could pull the trigger and it would all be over. No, not like this. He still had questions that needed answering. This is personal for you, isn't it? Ryan purred with a slight smirk, doing an incredible job of blocking out the pain and cold he felt to maintain his superior attitude. Out of curiosity, what exactly did I do that drove you to this? Shadles' eyes burned with rage, but he took a moment to collect himself and kept his voice steady. I want you to think about every act that you've committed, every person that you've hurt, every family you've torn apart, that might make someone want to hurt you as badly as I do. I want you to reflect on that, because what I'm doing now, it's for them as it is for me. He gestured to the camera as he said it. Ryan nodded. His expression was thoughtful, but he remained determined. So you think you're the hero of the story, do you? Well, I've made my peace with playing the villain. The question is, can you? I won't have to. Ryan wanted to shut his eyes, but was determined to defy him until the end, and threw an icy glare at him down the barrel of the gun. Click. Ryan unconsciously flinched, and he could have sworn he heard a gunshot. For a second, he thought it might have been over so quick he hadn't felt it, that he was still cold and still felt all the pain of his wounds. So, it's not going to be quick then. Shadow's voice confirmed he was still alive as he walked around him. 1 in 4. He leaned the barrel painfully hard into Ryan's left thigh and pulled the trigger. This time, Ryan definitely heard a gunshot. He could have sworn it had come from outside the room. The pain didn't register immediately, but the impact of the bullet did. It felt like he'd been hit with a hammer. He grunted in shock and caught himself at the last minute, clenching and baring his teeth against the scream, remembering he couldn't let Shadles win this one. His leg was suddenly warm and wet, and as he looked down, he could see huge volumes of blood pulsing from the bullet wound, soaking into his jeans and spreading rapidly down his leg. There was so much blood. He must have nicked his femoral artery. He wouldn't have long until he bled out. Shadles seemed more surprised than Ryan as he looked on in shock, watching the blood spread with a slight frown. He mused, sounding discontented. That wasn't nearly as satisfying as I'd hoped. He paused, fishing in his pocket for the spare round, and reloaded the revolver. The next one was going to go in your belly, then, if you got really lucky, your heart. Ryan grimaced through the pain. Sorry to disappoint you. Oh, wait. I'm not. The color was rapidly draining from Ryan's face. The blood loss hit him hard. He was hyperventilating. He couldn't focus properly. He thought Shadles was showboating or something for the camera again. Zutora was watching on, looking bored and disappointed. Ryan's vision became hazy, and all he could feel was the warm, pulsing blood leaving his body and the cold consuming him. Well, you fucked up, but at least you didn't let them win. He closed his eyes and waited for death to take him. Out of nowhere, an explosion rocked the building, and Ryan was aware of intense heat, more than he would have expected from an explosion, and the sound of rapid gunfire. He hadn't been abandoned after all.